Amen. Amen. Nobody in the world eats better than the bereaved Southerner. At least this is the claim that Gaydon Metcalf and Charlotte Hayes make in this wonderful little book I found a number of years ago titled Being Dead is No Excuse, the official Southern Ladies' Guide to Hosting the Perfect Funeral. Now, I know I've told some of you about this book before, a few years ago, I think it was. In fact, some of you remember it well. We were just talking about it a couple of weeks ago during our Friday afternoon social hour that we've been calling Friday Tea Time. Anyway, as the authors say, nobody eats better than the bereaved Southerner. And then they go on to say, in the Delta, we ask not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for all of us. And the message we hear is, open a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup and get busy. When somebody dies, I may not know them well enough to go to the house or attend the funeral, but I can always take the family a casserole. This book includes a whole host of recipes for everything from tomato aspic to green pea casserole to chocolate chess pie. But the real treasure in this book, I think, is the very funny look at the ins and outs of funeral customs in a small middle-class white community in the Mississippi Delta. People in the Delta look better dead, whether in their coffins or their obituaries, the authors write. We don't believe you have to have won a Nobel Prize to get a good obituary. A glowing obituary is practically a birthright. In one of my favorite chapters in this book, entitled The Methodist Ladies versus the Episcopal Ladies, they not only compare and contrast the usual sort of cuisine served at First Methodist and at St. James Episcopal, and the relative classiness with which it is served, they admonish you to think about your mourner's needs upon your own passing. Quote, if you think your family will be so devastated by your departure that they will require the solace of strong drink, join St. James Episcopal immediately. The book talks about coffins, cemeteries, hosting visitors from out of town, even music choices, which includes a list of selections tellingly titled, Being Dead doesn't mean you have good taste. But throughout it all, somehow they keep coming back to the food. Whether the reception is at the church or at the home, whether you need a little post-reception to have a, quote, restorative cocktail, or 2, or 6, or even if perhaps the grieving family got a little too carried away with the restorative cocktails the day before the funeral and in their altered state ransacked through all of the food except for the desserts, and the reception plans have to change. In any event, food is a big deal in these moments. You know, and we know that too. Here in this church, it's not just a Southern thing to provide well for the waistline in times of mourning. While I've never seen any tomato aspic, our own funeral receptions team here at this church does a phenomenal job. But there is yet to be one that I have seen that has lacked enough food. Our team, that wonderful core group of coordinators headed up by Carol Jordan, to which I give many, many thanks, and a whole plethora of other helpers who pitch in time and time again. Our team provides a gracious ministry of hospitality and compassion that, to be honest, doesn't happen everywhere or in every church. It is a real gift and a treasure that we have here. Honestly, this doesn't surprise me all that much. Not just our funeral receptions team, but people in general. They are giving and helpful and compassionate most of the time. I want to do something. What can I do? How can I help? People are always asking these sorts of questions following tragedies or reaching out to friends in the wake of losses and transition. If anything, people usually lament that they can't do more, that what they can do seems like such a pittance in the face of someone's grief or compared to another person's generosity and service. People fear that what they do have and what they can do, that it's not enough. All I can do is bake some cookies. All I can do is make some sandwiches. All I can do is send a card or make a phone call or give a hug. Well, maybe not in this quarantine time, but usually. Surely that's nothing in the face of what has happened. Surely it's not enough, we worry. We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish, the disciples said. Surely that's not enough. Surely that's not enough. Look at all these people. There must be thousands of them. And we've been here all day with you, Jesus, curing and healing and caring. But what we have to offer now is just 5 loaves and 2 fish. Surely that's not enough, is it? Now, of course, we've already just now heard the story, and we know how it ends. The crowds were fed, with 12 baskets left over even. And a lot of thought has been thinked, and a lot of ink has been spilled, over just how it is that this so-called miracle might have happened. If you've spent any time in more sort of mainline and liberal-leaning sorts of churches like this one, you've probably heard someone explain away the story, saying that what happened wasn't some, scientifically impossible, physical multiplication, but that the real miracle was a miracle of human sharing, that the offering up of those loaves and fishes somehow opened the backpacks and the satchels and, most importantly, the hearts of those crowds, so that all of them shared with their neighbors. Could that be the case? Absolutely. I'm not sure that that's quite the point that the gospel writers wanted to get across. Even some of the most liberal-leaning and learned biblical scholars will admit that that might be stretching a little bit beyond the point that the gospel writers had in mind. Those writers probably had in mind to show Jesus' power and his purpose to use that power in the service of the undersides of society, the ordinary people, not the powerful. Although that doesn't preclude the miracle of sharing. The honest truth about this story, this scene of the multitudes that stands, it's the only miracle story that is told in all 4 of our Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The truth is we don't know exactly how it happened. Moreover, we certainly don't know how to do it ourselves. As noted preacher Patrick J. Wilson notes, the disciples say, "This is all we have, we don't have enough." And they're right, of course. We don't have enough. The church doesn't have enough to feed them. Whatever it was that Jesus did with 5 loaves and 2 fish, we don't know how to do that, it seems. We don't know how to do that exact miracle. But what we do know and what we do have is this story. Famed Jewish writer and Nobel Peace Prize awardee Elie Wiesel reminds us, though, that the story itself may be enough. Wiesel himself tells a story about stories like this. When the great rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the Jews, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There, he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished, and this misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Metzerich, had occasion, for the same reason, to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest, and he would say, "Master of the universe, listen. I do not know how to light the fire, but I am still able to say the prayer." And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sassof, in order to save his people once more, would go to the forest and say, "I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient." It was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. Then it fell to Rabbi Israel of Ritzain to overcome misfortune. And sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God, saying, "I am unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer. I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story. And this must be sufficient." And it was sufficient. The truth is, we can tell the story. We can make the phone call. We can bake the cookies and make the sandwiches. None of it is enough, it would seem. And yet, somehow it does end up being sufficient. People are fed. People are cared for. God's presence is felt and made real. And even more, my friends, Jesus is able to make sufficient even in the midst of grief and fear and despair. Our story this morning, you may remember, began with this mysterious line. "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself." What was this? As it turns out, Jesus had just heard that his own cousin and his forerunner in ministry, John the Baptist, had been murdered by Herod the king. And the more that Herod heard about Jesus' ministry, the more Herod wondered if somehow Jesus was John the Baptist returned from the dead. And so maybe it was grief over John's death, or maybe it was fear for Jesus' own safety and his continued ministry. But either way, Jesus just wants to get away. And yet, in the middle of grief and fear, still Jesus saw the crowds, had compassion for them anyway. Perhaps that's as much the miracle in this story as anything else. The thing that seems so unexpected and perhaps even impossible, at least in our own minds. If the stories of Jesus' miracles serve to reveal something about the character of God, then this miracle might just be that even when God's own self is grieving and under attack, still God has compassion. Still God is willing and able to reach out, to heal, and to feed. Really, when you think about it, that is the central strategy of our faith that we enact each and every time we gather here at this feast table. even in the midst of any grief we might have, of all of our doubt that we do have, of any fear, of our questions of whether any of what we do is enough, still we come and we place our not enoughness on the table and we deliver it into the hands of Jesus. And he takes our not enoughness and he blesses it and he breaks it up and he gives it around, and behold, a miracle. People are fed. Acknowledging our not enoughness, acknowledging our hunger, we come before God. And that hunger, that not enoughness, they are transformed into a holy offering and an invitation to a feast. And all of this happens in the midst of a place and a people and a world and even a God that are just as filled with tiredness and grief and sorrow as they were yesterday and as they will be tomorrow. But that is exactly where such miracles tend to happen, isn't it? According to one of the personalities that populates Metcalfe's and Hayes' book about the Southern funeral, if you don't get at least one caramel cake when you die in the Delta, somebody doesn't love you. And I'm sorry to say, as tasty as it would be, at least here in this space, we will not be slicing up caramel cake at this communion table this morning. I mean, I suppose it's possible that you have prepared caramel cake for your own table at home, but I'm guessing it doesn't seem too likely. But then again, today, this feast, the life we share, today is not a funeral, my friends. Rather, quite the opposite. We gather at this table, we gather together in prayer and community. We gather today in the presence of God as a preparation for life, not death. It is a training in what life in the world looks like when Jesus is here, as he is this day, to bless and break and give. Today is not a funeral. Today is school for life. And so, my friends, hear this story and come to this feast and taste and see that indeed somebody does love you very much. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto God, now and forever. Amen.